Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the thriller crime films from 2010, titled All Good Things. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens in 2000, with a prosecutor questioning an old man named David Marks about his past. When asked about his mother, David reveals that she passed away when he was 7. He also admits that he was present when she died, and it was a very violent death. We then see a note stating that the story is inspired by real events that happened between 1971 and 2003. After that, there's a montage of David's happy childhood memories, back when his mother was still alive. The movie then flashes back to New York City in 1971, where we see a young David dressed up and heading to a party. But his father suddenly informs him that there's a plumbing problem in one of their rental apartments. David is annoyed by this, but he reluctantly agrees to fix it and heads to the location with his dog, Ivan. Upon his arrival, he meets the tenant, a beautiful woman named Katie. He is captivated by her looks that he briefly forgets why he came here in the first place. David then begins inspecting the water pipe, and notices that it's leaking, but doesn't have any idea how to fix it. So, he apologizes to Katie, and suggests she call a real plumber instead. David then invites her to the party he's going to, and surprisingly, she accepts without hesitation. Shortly after, the two arrive at the party, and are greeted by David's father, Sanford Marks. The old man doesn't hesitate to scold his son for being late, and also feels embarrassed to see a simple-looking girl with him, and greets her coldly. After that, he introduces David to some important people, including senators and the mayor of the city. Here we find out that Sanford is a powerful real estate tycoon, who owns many properties in New York. Later, Katie and David leave the party early. He reveals to her how he isn't interested in his father's business, and wants to open a health food store instead. Katie encourages him to pursue this and says it's a nice idea. She also opens up about her life and reveals that she wanted to study medicine, but her father suddenly passed away, and things have been difficult for her since then. In the following days, David and Katie grow closer and start dating. The couple eventually relocates to Vermont, and opens a health food store called All Good Things. However, Sanford is unhappy with his son's decision, as he wants him to stay in New York instead. He also doesn't like the fact that David is dating a working-class girl. Sanford rudely tells his son that although Katie is a nice girl, she'll never be one of them. However, David doesn't care and states that perhaps it's a good thing. In the next scene, David goes to visit Katie's family, and is impressed by their simplicity. He feels very happy to see them all so affectionate, as he has never experienced such warmth in his home. Later, when Katie asks him what he thought of her family, he struggles to explain his feelings, and says they are just different. David then suddenly asks her if she wants to marry him. Katie is taken aback by the abrupt proposal, but since she loves him a lot, she accepts without hesitation. Days later, we see the couple joyfully getting married, but it seems like Sanford isn't happy with the situation. After the wedding, they all sit down for lunch. But despite being the wealthiest person at the table, Sanford makes Katie's mother pay for even a simple meal. The scene then cuts to a few months later, when Sanford comes to visit the couple in Vermont. It seems like the health food store isn't doing well, and he tries to persuade his son to come back to New York. But David assures him that they are very happy here. Hearing this, Sanford attempts to manipulate him by saying that Katie is a beautiful woman who doesn't deserve to live like this. The statement conflicts David, and he realizes that his father has a point. Following this, he finally changes his mind, and ends up selling the shabby place in Vermont. The couple then moves to New York, where David begins working in his father's company. His job mainly involves bookkeeping and collecting rent from their properties. David soon discovers that their business is not as glamorous as his father portrays. He finds out that most of their properties are rented out to porn theaters, peep shows, and brothels. After working for some time, David surprises Katie with a luxurious apartment in the city, making her very happy. Katie comments that their life seems to be perfect now, and asks what he thinks about having a child. But for some reason, this makes David very upset, and he refuses to have this conversation with her. Katie is surprised, and asks if there's something wrong, to which he responds yes. She tries to inquire further, but David ends the conversation. His reaction leads her to believe that he might be infertile. In the next scene, the couple attends a party, where David meets his childhood best friend, Deborah, and it seems like they are very close. While David is hanging out with other friends, Deborah discusses David's past with Katie, revealing how his mother jumped off the roof and cracked her skull open. David was so traumatized by the incident that he hid under a table. A week later, he finally came out, but acted as if his mother's death had no impact on him. This revelation shocks Katie, as she had no idea of her husband's traumatic past. Months later, the couple buys a lake house in Westchester to spend their holidays and weekends. They hold a housewarming party and invite many people, including friends and family. After everyone leaves, Katie surprises David by announcing that she's pregnant. He expectedly doesn't take the news well and gets mad. Katie explains that she thought he was infertile, but David says that's not what he meant. She assures him that their child won't have the same difficult upbringing as he did, and will grow up differently. Hearing this, David becomes even angrier and starts aggressively throwing things. Once he finally calms down, he tells her that he's willing to do anything in the world she asks, but he just can't do this one thing. The next morning, a frustrated Katie is going to a clinic to have the baby aborted. However, on the way, David notices some cops raiding a brothel that is rented out on one of their properties. He immediately calls his father, who asks him to collect the rent from another building before the cops get there. David refuses, saying that he needs to take Katie somewhere, but his dad insists that the situation is more important. With no other option, he asks Katie to proceed alone, and heads off to collect the rent. We later see her at the clinic, scared and upset, waiting for her turn. After the abortion, David picks her up and takes her to meet his friend. But Katie is still distraught about what happened, so she goes to the bathroom. The friend's wife, Lauren, follows her to the bathroom and tries to console her. She then offers her some drugs, and Katie agrees to it. Soon, her mind becomes disoriented, and she starts to enjoy the moment. Later that night, we see someone parking their car in front of a bridge. A woman with blonde hair gets out, and throws a black plastic bag into the river, which seems to contain a body. After this incident, Katie moves into the lake house and prepares for medical school, while David stays in New York. They only see each other on weekends, and it seems like their marriage is falling apart. One day, while at the lake house, David goes through the mail, and discovers that Katie has been accepted into medical college. Instead of being happy for her, he becomes very angry, and goes for a swim in the lake. Katie soon arrives, and is excited about her acceptance into medical college. But when she tries to share the news with David, he shows no concern. In the next scene, Katie's family throws a party to celebrate her acceptance into medical college. She seems very happy and is enjoying herself, but David is visibly agitated. He eventually walks up to her, and suggests they should leave. A shocked Katie explains that she wants to spend some time with her family. But David says he'll be waiting for her in the car. But moments later, when she doesn't come out, an enraged David decides to go back inside, and forcefully drags her out. The next morning, we see Katie packing her things and preparing to leave the house. She decides to divorce David, but he warns her that if she leaves, he's not going to be able to support her lifestyle. He urges her to calm down and reconsider her decision. Upon hearing this, Katie realizes that she has no choice but to stay with him. The next day, Katie is having lunch with Lauren and venting about her problems. Just then, the waitress informs Katie that her credit card has been declined. This shocks and embarrasses Katie, but fortunately, Lauren covers the bill. Later, the two women go to meet with the lawyer, and Katie explains that she wants to divorce her husband, and just needs some money to pay for medical college. The lawyer advises her that David is the beneficiary of all the family trusts, and Katie has access to those funds only if she remains legally married to him. But if she divorces him, she won't receive any money because David doesn't have anything on his own. The lawyer reveals that wealthy families often do this to protect themselves from potential divorces. Having been advised that she will need leverage to compel the family to give her a settlement, Katie attempts to find incriminating documents of their financial activities. The next day, Katie sneaks into David's office, revealing bruises on her face from a fight with David the night before. She then takes out an account book, which contains payment records proving that David's family rents out properties to illegal brothels. She promptly takes the book with her, and later mails it to the court. In the next scene, we see the blonde woman parking on the bridge again. She throws another plastic bag into the river, while we see a saw. The next day, the officials receive the account book, which reveals the dirty business of the Marks family. However, since the family is too powerful, they decide not to take any action and return the documents to Sanford. Later, David is being scolded by his younger brother for being incompetent and not working properly. Sanford is also very angry with him, and calls him a weak man for not being able to control his wife. As a result, Sanford decides to remove David from his business affairs, and hands control of the organization over to his younger son. On the other hand, Katie arrives at her parents' house, and vents her frustration to everyone. Her mental condition has been deteriorating, and she explains how she feels guilty about the abortion. That night, she drinks heavily and calls David, saying she can't take it anymore and wants to leave him. He responds that he understands her and asks her to come back. David promises to improve the situation and claims that he loves her. After hanging up, David looks at his dog Ivan, and asks what he's looking at. Meanwhile, a drunk Katie gets in her car and drives away, despite her family's advice. She soon arrives home, where David greets her, and asks if she has eaten. Katie inquires about Ivan, but he responds that the dog has been locked in the kennel because he bit him. The couple then eats dinner, during which David suddenly remarks that she would have made a good mother. Upon hearing this, Katie feels emotional, but doesn't respond, and goes to throw garbage in the trash can. But then, while doing so, she finds Ivan's bloody scarf lying on the ground. Katie tearfully brings the scarf inside, and shows it to David. But he remains surprisingly calm and doesn't say anything. Shortly after, their neighbor hears a loud banging sound coming from their house. But when she looks outside, she doesn't see anything unusual. Later that night, David arrives at his father's mansion. He assumes that his mom must have hated him, but Sanford explains that she was a very sick woman. Sanford did everything for her, just as he did for David. However, the latter becomes enraged, and accuses Dad of letting him to witness his mother's death. Sanford responds that he hopes seeing David would change his mother's mind at the last moment. He urges his son not to dwell on this, and to go back to his wife. Surprisingly, David reveals that she's gone, and now he's just like his father. He then proceeds to leave, while Sanford follows him outside to ask what he meant by that. The scene then shifts to the present day in the courtroom, where older David is speaking to the jury. He reveals that he and Katie went to the lake house, and then he put her on a train back to the city. This was the last time he ever saw her. However, the prosecutor states that, based on the eyewitness, Katie was seen at their apartment in the city later that night. And the next morning, a doorman saw her making a phone call and getting into a taxi. David confirms this, and clarifies that he has no involvement in her disappearance. At this point, it is revealed that Katie disappeared in 1982 without a trace, and has never been found. In a flashback, we see that 18 years later, a public prosecutor reopens the case with David as the main suspect. When David learns of this news, he immediately relocates to Texas, and takes on a new identity as a woman. One day, he is approached by an elderly neighbor named Marvin, who begins to scold him for making noise. But David pretends to be mute to avoid the confrontation. In the evening, he watches the news and learns that his wife's case has been reopened by the district attorney, after reading an unpublished novel written by his best friend Deborah. The novel surprisingly contains a murder almost identical to Katie's case. He also learns that the police went to his lake house and searched for dead bodies, but found nothing except for the dog's remains. At this moment, David receives a voicemail from Deborah, asking for his help. She mentions that the cops and reporters want to talk to her and urges him to call her back. Deborah says that she's going through a difficult time, and is in need of money. However, David doesn't seem too concerned about her request. As time passes, he and his old neighbor, Marvin, begin to get along, and spend a lot of time together. The old man eventually discovers that David is not a mute woman, but is disguising himself as one. However, Marvin doesn't mind, and understands that he must have his reasons. David even gives him his set of apartment keys, so Marvin can watch his TV whenever he wants. Over time, Marvin also realizes that David is wealthy, and the two men start looking for houses around town, planning to live together. Meanwhile, Deborah continues to leave voicemails for David, but when he doesn't respond, she threatens to call the cops. One day, when she arrives at her house, she notices someone's car outside. She thinks it must be David and becomes excited. Unfortunately, as she enters her house, it turns out to be Marvin, who immediately shoots her on the spot. He later goes to a nearby motel and calls David to tell him that he's taken care of everything, but David doesn't pick up. Over the next few days, Marvin desperately tries to reach David, but gets no response. It turns out he is facing financial troubles, and has even been evicted from his apartment, so he made a deal with David. One evening, when David returns to his apartment, he hears Marvin watching TV there. The old man accuses him of betrayal and tries to shoot him, but David easily disarms him, leading to a fight between them. David hits the old man with a telephone multiple times, and finishes the job by shooting him. Returning to the courtroom, David claims that he killed Marvin out of self-defense. He makes up a story that the old man was evicted from his place, and demanded that David take him in. But when he refused, Marvin got angry and tried to kill him. David admits that he thought no one would believe his story, so he got rid of the body. A flashback then shows him dumping the body near a bridge, revealing that he's the same killer who disguises himself as a blonde woman. This implies that he has been doing this for a long time now. The prosecutor asks David whether he murdered his best friend, Deborah, but the latter denies it. The prosecutor then asks if her death is related to Katie's disappearance, to which David again responds no. Next, we see a flashback to 1982, on the morning after Katie's disappearance. The doorman had seen someone who looked like Katie making a phone call and getting into a taxi. Surprisingly, it turns out that it was actually Deborah, disguised in a blonde wig and wearing Katie's clothes. The scene then shifts to the night of the incident when David went to meet his father. Sanford had followed him outside, demanding to know what he meant to say before. Moments later, when the father opened David's car trunk, he was confronted with a horrifying sight, presumably Katie's remains. The movie ends with the revelation that David's testimony in his trial for Marvin's murder persuaded the jury that he acted in self-defense. He was found not guilty, but due to the improper disposal of the body, he was sentenced to 9 months in jail. Moreover, no one has ever charged with the murder of Deborah. Katie's disappearance is still unsolved to this day, while David went on to become a successful real estate investor. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.